Today we continue our podcast of the prophetic writing series. We're dealing with the book The Beginnings. And firstly, we're looking at the Deuteronomic laws. And we're going to show that many of these were created by the Jewish priests who borrowed them from the Hammurabic legal code whilst in Babylon. And then we're going to be dealing with the relocation from Horeb to Canaan and what actually took place there. When they would be writing their foundation documents, the Jewish priests decided to show that their civil laws were given to them by God through Moses, although many of these laws can be seen to have been styled on the Babylonian Hammurabic legal code. It's interesting to note that with Hammurabi, when he writes his legal code, he states here that God called him to bring justice in the land, and God called him to make these laws. And in a sense, it was as if God was now enforcing his law through Hammurabi. And they wanted to show the same thing. And they wanted to show these laws being written through Moses with the authority of God. And we've showed earlier that all of the religious writings in the Levant and Mesopotamia, they wrote these writings, all of the various tribes wrote them with the God speaking directly in these writings. And if it wasn't God speaking, then the document didn't carry the authority of God. And the Israelitish priests during the Babylonian captivity adopted the same model and wanted to show all of these laws emanating from God. And we show that this is definitely not the case. In actual fact, most of the Torah, where they have God speaking, probably 90% or more, wasn't God speaking at all. But it was the priests depicting what they wanted to depict at that particular time. And we've looked at these various laws, and we find that many of them are unjust, and the laws themselves are sinful, some of them. For instance, the law of a slave in Exodus 21. If a man strikes his male or female slave with the rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. Pardon me. We see that these laws and some of the Hammurabic laws were very low on human rights observances, and they were very harsh and unfair. And they were cruel in a sense, these laws, as we can see from this first law that we read out about the slaves. There are also laws for the fathers selling their daughters to be used as sex slaves. In Exodus 21 from verse 7, if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. And if she is displeasing in the eyes of a master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have the authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. And if he takes to himself another woman, he may not produce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. So we see, in a sense, it was almost as if they were purchasing a sex partner, and so in a sense it was like selling one's daughter as a sex slave, and one can see that definitely is a major problem, and many people have seen that over the years. And then again, the sexist laws against wives when men were under the impression that the wives may have been unfaithful to them, even without any evidence of this having taken place. In Numbers 5, it deals with the law of jealousy. And from verse 16, it says, then the priest shall bring her near and have her stand before the Lord, and the priest shall take holy water in an earthenware vessel, and he shall take some of the dust that is on the floor of the tabernacle and put it into the water. And the priest shall then have the woman stand before the Lord, and let the hair of the woman's head go loose, and place the grain offering of memorial in her hands, which is the grain offering of jealousy. And in the hand of the priest is to be the water of bitterness that brings a curse. The priest shall then have her take an oath, and shall say to the woman, if no man has lain with you, and you have not gone astray unto uncleanness, being under the authority of your husband, be immune to this water of bitterness that brings a curse. If you, however, have gone astray and been under the authority of your husband, and if you have defiled yourself and a man other than your husband has had intercourse with you, then the priest shall have the woman swear with the oath of the curse, and the priest shall say to the woman, the Lord make you a curse and an oath among your people by the Lord's making your thigh waste away and your abdomen swell. And this water that brings a curse shall go into your stomach and make your abdomen swell and your thigh waste away. And the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. And the priest shall then write these curses on a scroll, and they shall wash them off into the water of bitterness. And the woman shall drink the water of bitterness that brings the curse. So we see that these laws were terribly unjust and humiliating, and definitely not high on human rights observances. And then the law to stone a woman to death for not being a virgin when she married her husband. Deuteronomy 22 from verse 13, if a man takes a wife and goes into her and then turns against her and charges her with the shameful deeds of publicly defames her and says, I took this woman, but when I came near her, I did not find her a virgin. Then the girl's father and the mother shall take and bring out the evidence of the girl's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. And the girl's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man for a wife, but he turned against her. And behold, he has charged you with shameful deeds. I did not find your daughter a virgin, but this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the garment before the elders of the city. And so the elders of the city shall take the man and chastise him. And they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, give it to the girl's father. But if this charge is true, going on from verse 20, that the girl was not found a virgin, then you will bring out the girl to the doorway of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her to death, because she has committed an act of folly in Israel by playing the harlot. Now, this whole type of law is fraught with issues. I mean, the husband, if he commits the crime, he gets a fine. The woman gets stoned to death on the spot. And one can see the unfairness of this situation. And these are the type of laws that were written from that time, and also the law for taking a life, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And we'll show later on that many of these laws came from Babylon. We take a lot of these laws and we put the Hammurabic law and then the Torah law, and for example, Hammurabic Code 14, a kidnapper is to be killed. Torah, Exodus 21:16, he who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. And then Hammurabic Code 60, when someone allows a farmer to plant a date orchard and he cultivates this for 4 years, it is only in the 5th year that the owner and the farmer may divide the fruit, the owner first and then the farmer. And then the Torah, Leviticus 19:23, when you enter the land and plant all kinds of trees for food, then you shall count the fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you then, and it shall not be eaten. But in the 4th year its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. In the 5th year you are to eat its fruit, that its yield may increase, etc., etc. And those kind of laws, and I've got about 20 of them there or more. And you can see how these laws are very, very similar. For instance, the law of a man fighting with another man, Hammurabic Code 206, and if the man's injured, he must then pay for his medical bills. And similarly, Exodus 21:18, if they quarrel and they fight, he shall pay for his loss of time and shall take care of him until he is completely healed. So one can see the similarity between these laws. And then the law of the ox goring in Hammurabi Code 250. If someone has an ox gorer and they know it's got this problem, and they must pay restitution then and pay 30 shekels of silver. And then Exodus 21:32, if the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver. So we see the similarity between many of these laws, and we show clearly that they were received during the Babylonian captivity and written back into their accounts. But they wanted to give these the authority of Moses, and therefore state that Moses actually gave these laws. So we show clearly that's not the case there. Now, in dealing with the relocation of the Avaris refugees from Horeb to Canaan, we notice that there were many issues with these accounts, and we've shown many of the elements of their history were rewritten and fabricated and various things. And one of the main things that the Jewish priests wanted to show during the Babylonian captivity was that God was leading them day by day, and that from the time they left Egypt with all these plagues, which we show didn't actually take place, and the parting of the Red Sea and various things like that, and that the Lord was purportedly present with them every day in a cloud by day, in the fire by night, and that every day, every step of the way, God was with them and guiding them and leading them. But we show that wasn't the case. And the reason they were showing that, they wanted to show that God had given them an everlasting covenant for this land of Canaan, which we show the kings never knew about, and they didn't know anything about a covenant. It was only when it was written back during their Babylonian captivity into the foundation document. So we see that a point comes where when they relocate back to Canaan. Well, not really back to Canaan, because they only purportedly left Canaan as a small group of people, one family. So now they're going back to where Abraham's roots were. And we see that with the fabrication of the many stories that we've just mentioned, this fabrication continues now in this relocation and various things. And we've shown that all these spectacular elements became the modus operandi, the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea, the God being with them every day, and then going back into Canaan, the River Jordan banking up and them going through on dry land, and attacking the people at Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. That was all part of the modus operandi, and that's not actually how it happened. And we show that what happened was that in all probability the death of Moses at Horeb probably precipitated this move. Moses was the connection with Jethro and his family and the people of Horeb. And with Moses now gone, indications are that they decide to actually relocate. We see in Deuteronomy 34, it mentions that Moses died under strange circumstances and that nobody knows where he was buried in Deuteronomy 34:5. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord, and he buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day. And we state that the reason nobody knows is that he actually died at Horeb, and this precipitated the actual move to Horeb. So that was part of their story. They're wanting to show that Moses was with them and leading them on into Canaan. But in all probability, that did not take place, as we see the many fabrications that would have been an additional fabrication to their story. But we see that they decided to relocate, and we mention in the book that all indications are that they stayed at Horeb for around 40 years, and they stayed in a transit camp, and then they decided to leave. And they wouldn't have left en masse, they would have left in groups. And they probably had an advance party, left in groups, and they started to settle into that area where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, etc., where those people were. And we'll be showing later on that a situation arose where the people that settled there started to marry the locals in the area, and they gave their daughters as well as wives for the people of that area. And that caused a major problem. And in trying to sort that problem out, it caused disputes and fights and wars and things. And it's from that time that they decided to annihilate all those tribes. And they used the list of those peoples, which are repeated purportedly before they left Egypt, God showing them that they're going to drive these people out. But we show they only knew those people and met those people once they settled in the land. And it was them marrying these peoples that caused the difference. And as they got more and more people into the land of Canaan, they decided to wage war against these people and annihilate them. And we show that actually in the book. So they started to go on from Horeb, and they left in groups. And we show that they talk about moving in the cloud. They had the cloud during the day and the pillar of fire by night. But it's a strange thing. It mentions in Numbers 10 that they try to approach the family of Jethro to actually go with them and assist them in their journey. That's Numbers 10 from verse 29. Then Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out to the place to which the Lord said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good, for the Lord has promised good concerning Israel. But he said to him, I will not come, but rather will go to my own land and relatives. And then he said, please do not leave us, inasmuch as you know where we should camp in the wilderness, and you will be as eyes for us. So it will be if you go with us, and whatever the good Lord does for us, we will do for you. So we see in here they wanted these people to be eyes for them, to show them where to camp and possibly show them where water and etc. And this mitigates this whole thing about there being a pillar of cloud in the day and a fire by night. And we see that that was part of their spectacular demonstration that they were doing throughout this rewrite, and that didn't actually occur. We also show that the manna in the wilderness, was something that developed during the journey, and in the biblical account they actually speak about this manna descending from the sky, and that it was mentioned that this manna would be sent beforehand. But we look at the actual word for manna, and we see that the word manna has got an Aramaic root, manhu, and it means what is it? And we've got the reference there where we actually found that. And indications are that on the journey that there was a phenomenon in the area where there was an exudation either from the trees or the insects on the trees that fell to the ground, and people could collect this and eat it, and they've done experiments and various things there in that area, and they found that. So it might have been the exudation of the insects that they were eating, but the insects or the trees, and it wouldn't have been pre-announced, because they wouldn't have called what is it if they knew exactly what it was. And we show that actually in the book. We also show that while they traveled with cattle and food and provisions, and there wasn't a dire need for manna and that type of thing. And we see that this was created in the story to try and show this miraculous move from Horeb to Canaan, which was a journey. We mentioned it's about 300 kilometers. And for all intents and purposes, it would have taken 3, 4, 5, 6 months to actually make this journey. But because they're now establishing a story and they are fabricating many of the events, these events are fabricated and are made more spectacular than they actually are. And we show that in the book. And we show that they would have moved in groups, and they wouldn't have moved en masse with 2 or 3 million people. That wouldn't have been the case. And then they started to settle into this area. And as it says in Judges, they started to marry these peoples and then fell out with them and wanted to eliminate them. The reason they were trying to eliminate these people was that they believed that their god was Gibbor, and this is how many of the tribes in the area considered their gods, the warrior, and they would have believed that God was with them. And if it was their desire to go and make war, then they believed God would go with them and he would kill those people on their behalf. And that's the actual the attitude that they have. And when looking at the relocation into Canaan, there's 3 factors which we state in the book, and that one must take into account when looking at the first known issue that we need to take into account is that the Jewish priests during the Babylonian captivity were rewriting their foundation documents, and that many accounts therein were purposefully fabricated in terms of their survivalist strategy. So that's one thing one must remember there's a survivalist strategy on the go. Secondly, it must be borne in mind that although God was revealing himself to the Israelites, that this was a progressive revelation and that the understanding of the character of God was flawed. We've shown that all the religious cosmologies had elements of God in them, but as far as the character of God, it was flawed. It's only since Messiah that we see God loves all people and wants them all to come to the knowledge of God. And God doesn't go before his peoples to kill other peoples. And as we've mentioned, they believed that their God was a mighty warrior, Gibbor, and that he was going before them to actually kill these peoples. So we show that they had a flawed view of the character of God. And what happened there was that they wanted to show God giving them this land by wiping out these people from the face of the earth. And that's when the saying came up in Judges 3 verse 5. The sons of Israel lived amongst the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and they married and they took wives and gave their daughters as wives to them. And after that time, that became almost like a rhyme. We must go and annihilate the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And we see it stemmed from this initial time. And the fact that they speak about it when they were leaving Egypt, that of course was written back into their document, knowing that they would confront those people and that they wanted to eliminate those people. And therefore, up front, they state that God is going to drive these people out of the land, which never actually happened, and it never actually took place. We've shown in the book too that this problem with the intermarrying, they show the book of Joshua, that Joshua went and systematically just took all these different tribes and they wiped out that whole area. They tried to eliminate and kill all those people. We show that wouldn't have been the case, and we show that the people settled into the land, intermarried with them, and after that time, when they had all their numbers that came through from Horeb and settled into the land, that they were now strengthened, and at that point they started to go out and started to kill these people. And what they were actually doing is they were their will and desire. They believed that was the will and desire of God. So they projected their actual belief onto God and said God was showing them to actually kill these people. We mentioned that in the book and we show it clearly. So they went out there and they tried to commit genocide against these people, but they weren't successful, and the people were still in the land. When they came back from captivity, all those tribes, the Hivites, the Jebusites, etc., were all still in the land at that particular time. So they started to project their will and desires as the will and desires of God, and we show that actually in the book. We also show that the actual history, which would have been closer to what happened, would have been reflected in the book of Jasher and in the book of the Wars of the Lord. But those books no longer carried the narrative that they were writing about, so they couldn't maintain those or keep those books. They redacted sections of that back into their writings and then discarded those books once the rewritten accounts were written, because the two accounts wouldn't have agreed. There would have been major differences, and one would have easily seen that there were major fabrications. So they started to develop this particular, and they saw at the outset, when the Israelites gained victories over their enemies, they saw it as God giving them the land, which became their possession. And when they lost this land, they saw it as God taking this land away and giving it to others. So there was no misconception. It even reveals in the Kings that there was an everlasting covenant for this land. One can see clearly that this was a covenant that was made. And we've shown that the land of milk and honey motif from Joshua 5:6, that's mentioned in Joshua, was first spoken by Jeremiah 11:1-5. And just before going into captivity, he started to speak of a land being sworn to them, which is based on Exodus 19:5-6. And we show that Exodus 19:5-6, there was no land promised to them. And Jeremiah placed his own take on that situation and that it wasn't actually from God, and we show that clearly in the book. On that note, we finish this particular podcast. Remember, these books can be obtained from Amazon.com and BookBaby.com. And there is much more in the book than what I'm sharing with you. I'm just sharing snippets, and there's much more support for what I'm saying in the actual books. Thank you for watching.